equality, and we wanted to explore the possibility that you could have gender fairness without necessarily having everything being 50-50. And we've had a number of talks since then, and just housekeeping things we have coming up. The next talk will be on the 17th of November. John Barry and Martin Seeger are going to be looking at men and mental health, and then in December, or is it we've got another talk in time for the festive season, which will be on domestic violence.
December the 15th?
December the 15th, domestic violence. So Ben Hine will be talking about that. And today we have with us Gijsbert Stoet. And Gijsbert is, he's a psychologist from Leeds, and he's done a lot of research on gender differences in education, and including looking at maths anxiety in girls and the way that boys have been falling behind in education. And I think the fact that what's been happening with boys is now receiving media attention, that even our Prime Minister mentioned it when she became Prime Minister, is very much thanks to the work of Gijsbert and others like Gijsbert who've been drawing attention to these issues. And he's also very interested in the societal implications of his research, which I think is what Gijsbert's going to be talking about today. So thank you very much for coming down here. I'm very, very much looking forward to your talk, and yeah.
Oh, thank you for the nice introduction. I wonder actually, is this too loud?
No, you could be louder.
I can hear myself extremely well now, so I'm not used to that. So, right, let me also record this myself for the future generations of students who want to listen to this. Right, okay, the title is here, Are Gender Differences in Study and Job Participation a National Problem? Now, I have written my talk because I always think that it has some advantages, but I will try to, that it will be looking spontaneous. I've written it as if it's not written down. Okay, so today I will talk about attempts to get a balance in the numbers of men and women working in various occupations, and attempts to get a balance in the numbers of boys and girls choosing school and university subjects. Now, let me see how to go to the next one. Right. As you know, this is a very sensitive subject. Some people can get really upset when they hear something they do not agree with. I've noticed this myself in the past, and therefore I started with a short disclaimer, like you see under these emails and so on nowadays. So, okay, here it goes. So today's talk is based on my own experience and work in the area of gender differences. I'm not speaking on anyone's behalf. I do not speak on behalf of my employer, my university, my family, or my country, the Netherlands. So don't say Dutch are really bad after this talk. It's all my opinion, based on the things I have read and heard about, combined with the relevant research that I have read about in regard to gender differences. And what I also will try to do in this talk is not just to talk about my own viewpoints, but I'd like to represent all the different viewpoints that there are about these topics, to give sort of like a comprehensive overview about the various arguments about the need to change the gender balance. Now that that is out of the way, I would like to start discussing the various attempts to change the number of... Really funny. Sorry, I can't really concentrate very well with this. It sounds really weird to me, and I know it sounds great to you. But,
There's a little button at the bottom of it.
Right.
Don't press the red one.
It's this that one. Right. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So this doesn't sound funny for me for strange technical reasons. Right. Okay. So we go on. So now that that's out of the way, the disclaimer, let me start discussing about the various attempts that there are to change the numbers of girls choosing technical subjects and also some other attempts to change the gender balance in education as well in the workforce. Now, before I go on, I would like to show you a short video that illustrates the societal debate about this topic very well. So I need to go to YouTube where this video is. And that is only 3 minutes and 28 seconds. There's even music, so very nice.
Study science will help them get into better paid professions. So what are the statistics? Well, at the moment at GCSE level, girls consistently outperform boys in science subjects. But after the age of 16, most girls drop science. For example, physics is the third most popular A-level for boys, but only the 19th for girls. And around half of all state schools in the UK have no girls studying physics at A-level at all. Yet pupils who do go on to have salaries up to £4,500 higher than those who don't. Of 14,000 engineering apprentices last year, only 450 were female.
How to get more girls into science? Well, probably not like this. The European Commission's attempt had to be withdrawn.
Let's take this and flip it on its head.
IBM didn't do much better.
To blow away the misperception.
For generations, the lack of girls studying the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering and maths, has vexed industry, education and government. Tomorrow, this government will pledge to get 15,000 girls into the subjects as a route to higher paid jobs.
72,000 girls get grades A star to C at GCSE, but only 10% go on to pursue physics at A-level. And the concern is that decision has a long-term impact on their earning capacity.
What am I going to be plotting on my y-axis?
Holsworth School in Tamworth seeks to encourage its girls through positive role models. A science department made up of 7 female and 3 male teachers. The split of pupils is 50-50, double the number of girls usually found in such classes.
I'm not saying that all physics teachers need to be female, but it'd be really nice if there was more of them there. Telling them about careers and maybe females that have gone on to do a physics career and how well they've done their job, I think is also really important.
So what is likely to encourage more girls to take STEM subjects?
Positive role models, learning more about the career aspects of science, how science applies to what we use in everyday life.
The government believes encouraging girls towards science will increase their salaries and help close the gender pay gap.
We need 82,000 more engineers every year for the next 10 years in this country. They cannot all be male, and there's some great jobs out there.
But according to this psychologist, quotas are not the way to create productive adults.
Every child is different, and ultimately the most important thing for a parent is not to look at the gender of the child, but to look at, what is your child good at, what does your child enjoy, and make a decision based on that.
Getting women into science and engineering is, it seems, almost as challenging as the subjects themselves. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Tamworth.
Right. Well, that is a very good video, not just because it stars me, but also because it mentions some of the arguments to get more girls and women in technology-related subjects. And I'm going to talk about these arguments later in the talk. But first, I want to go back a little bit in time, in history, to show you when this discussion actually started. So, the debate about girls and education is certainly not new. In fact, people have been debating this for centuries. A good example of this work is the work of Mary Wollstonecraft, who lived in England in the second half of the 18th century. She wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women, and in this work she argued that women's lack of education in the 18th century was responsible for women's weaker position in society. And it's certainly true that her work was as revolutionary as the time in which she lived. That was the time in which the Western world both Western Europe and North America went through a major transformation. For example, both the French Revolution and the American Revolution took place in this period. In many ways, it was the period in which the ideas of the Enlightenment, which of course started earlier than this, were applied in reality by the elites of that time. Now, speaking of elites, this is relevant, I think. Before the 19th century, there was actually no serious education for the masses. In other words, Mary Wollstonecraft's work would have been relevant for only a very small section of the population in that time. What I mean with that is to say that it's not correct to think that men in the 18th century were all having a great time and fun, and they were like sitting and eating, and women were like sort of like, you know, only looking after babies. Life was really tough for both men and women in that time, and few had any sort of education. But since the 18th century, there has been a gradual increase of female participation in education. And it's important to know also that, for example, in the United States, gender parity, so 50-50 balance, was reached in higher education in the late 1970s, and it's similar for the UK. And so most people will, of course, agree that this is an educational success story of that spans various centuries. Much has changed over the past centuries. Educational systems have developed. People have really developed good educational systems that do not only have a good curriculum, which is a real breakthrough, because in the 18th century, for example, people didn't really have a curriculum, but they have also become accessible for all people, for poor and rich, and for boys and for girls. But the real topic of today's talk is not so much about this general participation and achievement of girls and women. Today, we're talking about the gender balance within subject areas and occupations. The debate about the underrepresentation of girls and women in science and in the science and technology sector has really only taken off probably in the 1980s. It's hard to put an exact date on this, but I spoke also with colleagues who are experts in this area about this, and they agree with me that is sort of like a time when people really started about the issue of the lack of a gender balance in many subject areas. Now, today's aim of people, of society, is to get more girls in the technical sector, I think, can be seen as a continuation of a path to greater female or greater gender equality. Now, I'm not saying that it is a continuation of the same struggle for equality, but I'm saying, and this is important, I'm saying that it can be seen as such, and I think actually that is a general perception in society that is actually just a continuation of the same process. I think that there are various, so this general perception of a continued fight for equality, this perception that people have of this, can explain why almost all of the debate today focuses on women's underrepresentation and rarely on men's underrepresentation, basically in the same number of subjects, such as, say, psychology. But what I think is the case, it is debatable whether a greater gender balance in education or in occupational roles, such as engineering, really would mean that we would have a greater gender equality. There are different viewpoints on this, and today I will show what these different viewpoints are and how how thinking about these different viewpoints might inform more sensible educational policies. Today, there are many different initiatives to encourage more girls and women to choose a career in the science and technology sector. In fact, like for example, I myself have been invited several times to be a keynote speaker on conferences to get more girls in physics or in mathematics. Today's talk is not about the specifics of these initiatives, but more about the underlying arguments why it is good to have a more balanced gender profile in various subjects. Now, one straightforward question that's here on the screen that we need to start with is really the question of whether the situation is really so bad that all this effort, like even today's talk, is really justified. Are these numbers, are there really so few girls in these subjects? Now, it's absolutely true that girls and women are underrepresented in the non-organic science and technology subjects. With non-organic, I mean the subjects that deal with non-living objects, such as physics and engineering. But also, a good example is computer programming. Take, for example, the school subject computing, which includes computer programming. Yeah? So only 20% of girls in the GCSEs, they choose computing. And in the A-levels, it's only 11%. Now, does this mean that girls hate computers? No, of course not at all. How do I know? Well, of course, we know that girls and women use computers all the time, just like men. But there is a difference with using computers as appliances and studying computers themselves. It is similar to the difference between driving a car and enjoying tinkering with cars and taking them apart. This is actually reflected in the GCSE topic ICT, which is about working with software like spreadsheets and word processors. In ICT, you see a much better gender parity. In ICT, we have 41% girls in the GCSEs and 37% in the A-levels. It's not a perfect balance, but it's very different from computing. And we also know that few girls and women contribute to open source programming, open source software, and few women and girls actually buy or seem to enjoy computer magazines. Now, it's not just computer science, although computer science is probably the most extreme example. Other subjects with relatively low female participation are physics and engineering. Further, if you look at the more vocational educational tracks, you see very few girls choosing things such as construction or car mechanics. I probably have never met a female car mechanic, for example. I've also never had a male dental hygienist, for example. I mean, there are all sorts of examples, we know that. I mean, there are these sort of like really extreme examples in more lower skilled jobs. Now remember why I'm talking about this. I asked this question, whether the numbers are really so bad that the debate is justified, and I think that it is certainly the case that women and girls are strongly underrepresented in some technical subject domains. But that said, it's not correct to say that women and girls are generally strongly underrepresented in the whole spectrum known as STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and maths. I mean, if you remember the video, actually they said that they mentioned STEM, and we think, oh, there are not enough girls in STEM. But we actually see that women, girls and women, are strongly overrepresented in some sciences. For example, chemistry, GCSEs have been pretty much 50-50 for quite some time, and women are overrepresented in biological and medical areas. Psychology, which is actually officially counted as a STEM subject, is also a good example of this, with 80% of psychology university students being female. This latter issue links to the following. People, in general, I mean, people who talk about this sort of stuff in society, they forget that girls who do not choose technical subjects are actually still studying valuable subjects they enjoy. For example, the female students I meet in psychology are highly motivated and highly engaged students. They like what they're doing and they know where they want to go. In other words, it's not a debate about choosing between studying a technical subject or staying at home and looking after babies. This raises the question if there is actually a fundamental problem with the fact that girls choose non-technical subjects instead of these sort of like non-organic technical subjects. This is a really important point for the discussion about social justice and female empowerment. Given that today, in fact, more girls than boys go to higher education, why should we worry so much about what subjects they choose? Are girls who have the ability to do computing or physics, but who choose language, art, or psychology, making bad choices? Do we need to worry that they choose subjects they apparently like or want to study? Those are important questions. Of course, these questions, they cannot be answered by me. They are questions that society as a whole needs to answer in regard to its values. If we stress the importance of technical subjects, as we do, obviously, as you see in the video, we implicitly devalue non-technical subjects. One can ask if this is fair, especially given that non-technical subjects are crucially important for our society. Another issue we hear little about in the discussion about the gender balance is that there is almost no concern about boys and men not studying subjects in which they are severely underrepresented, such as psychology or nursing. Again, I think that this can be explained as an overvaluation of highly skilled technical subject areas. The idea is that people, including boys, should better focus on technical subjects, and whatever else they do is just not good enough. At least that is the feeling that you sometimes get. The only exception to this focus on technology is the underrepresentation of men as teachers. This topic comes actually back in the media regularly, and there is a specific UK governmental program to support men who want to go into primary school teaching. I don't know how successful this program actually is, but let's hope that it's not similar to the success or lack of success of the Australian program. There was just an article about this in The Conversation, which is an online magazine written by academics for the general public. In this article it said that even though there is an Australian scholarship program for attracting men since the year 2004, not a single scholarship has ever been awarded to anyone. It turns out that the Australian law forbids male-only scholarships. Well, apparently, so they say they are serious about it, but they are not so serious about the whole issue. And there are, of course, other areas than teaching in which men are underrepresented. I mentioned psychology several times, probably because I'm a psychologist myself. In psychology, it is really it's actually as extreme as the underrepresentation of women in physics. Yet I have actually, as a psychologist, I've never heard of any psychology department in the UK, or actually anywhere else, that aims to do anything about it. So it's just not an issue. It's on nobody's agenda. Nobody cares. At least that's my feeling. I'm not saying that that is necessarily a problem, but that's just what the situation is about. So the focus seems to be very much about on women and girls. The focus is on women. As said, the debate about gender balance focuses on women, and this is also reflected, and I know you've talked about this last month, is reflected in the UK's gender equality program for universities, the so-called Athena Swan program. SWAN is the abbreviation for Science Women Academic Network. So even though Athena Swan is supposed to cover gender equality for both men and women, only women are mentioned in the initiative's name. That makes me wonder how serious they really are about men's issues. Interestingly in this regard is that the Athena Swan program is also applied to psychology departments, with a focus on mentoring female staff and so on. I do honestly not know what the argument behind this is. Given that there's typically a female overrepresentation in these departments. But as I said in the introduction, I want to give all possible viewpoints on this here, fair representation. And in this context, I think that maybe you can make a case that the representation of female academic staff at senior levels is not as high as you would expect based on the percentage of female students. My feeling is personally that nowadays the large majority of PhD students in psychology is actually female. And my feeling is that in the near future, all psychology departments in the UK will have a majority female staff, so there is sort of like there is a change going on there. Now, I looked a little bit on the web at different universities where they report about Athena Swan, and the University of York has all its Athena Swan data really neatly presented on its website, probably to promote themselves as universities do, because there are so-called Athena Swan awards that individual universities or individual departments can apply for. So you can have a silver, bronze, or gold award in Athena Swan. And that looks really good, because universities want to advertise themselves as being, great places to work. What I found interesting about the University of York is that all departments there now have an Athena Swan award, except one. Yeah, it's not physics, it's not computing, it's not engineering, no, it's actually education. And I think that is probably because education there has a considerable female overrepresentation, and it apparently does not really make sense to have an Athena Swan program implemented there. Now, if I'm correct about this, and I'm only speculating, of course, about the University of York here, then this again shows that Athena Swan is not really concerned about true gender equality, but instead it's focused on female empowerment. I'm not saying that that is necessarily wrong, as again, some people will argue that the higher you get in university hierarchies, for example, the fewer women are represented in senior positions. And that such a program as Athena Swan could therefore be a reasonable help to change that. But if that is the case, I think they should just be more clear about this and not present it as a general gender equality program, because in my opinion it's not. And my main issue here is that as a society we seem to have less attention for the underrepresentation and underachievement of boys and men. The problem is probably exacerbated by the fact that gender debates are still mainly driven by women, despite the fact that male students are now underrepresented and underperforming, both at secondary, at primary, secondary, well, basically at all levels of education. I'm not sure why it is still being driven by women, but I guess that is just a continuation of a tradition. The danger is, in my opinion, that gender champions, who are mostly women, and the Athena Swan people are possibly not open for the new problems that have arisen more recently. And the danger is that these people are not looking at gender and education through the classic perspective on women's empowerment instead of actual gender equality. So, now I'm going to the next topic. So what is actually the motivation for change? In the video fragment that I played earlier, you heard a few of the arguments to get more girls into technology subjects. In the video, we heard that technical subjects are good because they lead to higher salaries. And also, as Nicky Morgan said there, the education secretary, the then education secretary, because there is a labor shortage in non-organic technology areas such as computing and certain types of engineering. The labor shortage argument raises questions, I think. It seems to me that it is applied as a matter of convenience, given that it is not used for subject areas in which women are overrepresented. For example, how often do you hear that there is a labor shortage in nursing and the great need to get more men into nursing education? You actually never hear about that, even though it is a massive issue, especially given the aging population in the UK. We obviously need many more nurses. Now, it's true, I think, that attracting more women to the technology sector can help to reduce the labor shortage in that sector. The question is, though, whether focusing on women makes most sense, given that women have shown little inclination, despite previous campaigns in education, and despite higher salaries. Of course, against that, the other view might be that one might argue that the reason why women are not inclined to go into the technology sector is purely because of social cultural factors, and that those factors can change if we really would like to. I will talk about the argument later. But if it would be social cultural, it's not easy to make social cultural changes rapidly. After all, it has not happened yet, despite the various initiatives that we have seen, and this is talked a lot about in schools. I guess that this practical consideration is well reflected in the NHS policy regarding its labor shortage among nurses. The NHS and the Education Secretary are not trying to convince English boys to take up a career in nursing. Instead, the NHS is dealing with the acute problem of lack of nurses by attracting mainly foreign female nurses. If they want to get more English nurses, which group should they best focus on? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I hardly think that focusing much energy on English boys and men would be as successful as focusing much energy on girls and women, who consistently have shown a much greater interest and inclination in the nursing profession. So, in short, the labor shortage argument that's being used in this whole debate is, I think, only true in theory. But in reality, it is not necessarily a good or practical argument to deal with the actual labor shortages we see in the technology sector. So far, I've discussed, of course, about the labor shortage argument. A related argument to get more girls and women into technology subjects is that they can make a lot more money there. I mean, we saw it in the video. They said you can earn almost £5,000 more a year if you go in the technology sector. Yes, it's true that you can earn a decent salary as a computer programmer. And yes, it's true that if all girls and women would become computer programmers or high-level engineers, the total sum of money earned by all women together would be higher than it is currently. In other words, this would change the so-called gender pay gap, and that was also mentioned in the video. But this argument about earnings has actually major weaknesses. One issue is that future earnings is only one of the many reasons for choosing a study subject or an occupation. In developed nations, in the Western world, future earning is an unlikely major motivator for teenagers who make subject choices at school. Think back of your own time at school. Did you choose subjects because they would make you rich, or did you choose them mainly because you liked them? We know that children choose subjects because of a feeling of ability and because of some form of interest. Another issue with this argument about earnings is that there is a constant, very narrow focus on highly prestigious jobs. But not all children are highly skilled. For those kids, there are many lower skilled technology jobs such as car mechanic or steel worker. You hear nothing about how we can encourage more vocationally oriented girls into these lower skilled technical jobs. Now look, for example, at my own country, the Netherlands, which has special vocational educational tracks for vocationally oriented students in secondary education. The gender differences in those educational pathways are really enormous. Very few Dutch girls want to become a car mechanic, and very few Dutch boys want to become a nurse. And that while the Netherlands actually has far better opportunities for girls than the United Kingdom, as for example was recently reported by the Save the Children report about